Welcome to the 22nd episode and last of this series. I will try to speak faster to cover the development of the different tactics that were used, as I don't want this chapter to get way too long. Fifth pair of formations that were both chosen for the first season. They were 2-4-5-1 with the same shape. The only difference was that the home tactic was attacking and the tempo was reduced from the standard, so the team would take some time to look for the man in front instead of trying to get the ball to the front too soon when they were either too far ahead or and the pass would be cut, or it would reach them but they would be isolated from the men behind and get tackled before anything could come from the attack. Counter-attack is something that I've said to yes in every formation. So many times a very clear chance for a counter-attack is lost with the striker or winger trying to run backwards. I will also only mention the players that have changed anything from the default. The left back was changed in mentality and closing down. Closing down was reduced a little to avoid events like one goal that the left back went too soon to mark a player from the middle and left the winger of the opposition team free in space, and that costed a goal. Mentality attacking more than default to occupy the space in the side that should be left by the inside forward that is ahead, and wide play left to normal so the width of the play could be controlled through shots. The left winger inside forward saw his mentality decreased a little, just like the other side winger, in order so they would not get so high and stay closer to the other players and have more easy passes towards him. Creative freedom increased, so he would be more willing to cut inside towards the middle. In the right winger, I wanted him to remain having the right touchline, so his creative freedom was taken down. The striker saw his mentality lowered as well, and his creative freedom lowered too. Drop deeper for easier passes to his feet and to stay around the middle. The mentality of this player was set so he would have a mentality a little lower than the other central midfielder, and not so high as default, by the same reason that I lowered the mentality of the other central midfielder. And the reason for that was that having two slow center backs, I didn't want the defensive line getting too far ahead. The creative freedom of the advanced playmaker was taken down considerably because in the original high creative freedom he used to be way too much in the left half of the pitch, leaving a big hole in the right half that could be exploited by the opposition. The anchorman saw his creative freedom also lowered because originally he was a deep lying playmaker, but in the last matches that I've used this formation, it was set to anchorman to keep him around the middle instead of running too far to the sides, leaving the center unmanned and the center backs unshielded. Another change set for him in the last times I used it was in the Liga Adelante, was run from deep and run with ball increased from the default, so he would be more willing to join in support of the attack. As the teams opposing us tended to close up shop, and we needed some more men ahead supporting the attack to relieve the pressure of the defense, recycling the ball with passes backwards. The away tactic is basically the same, but with a default anchor man, lowered mentalities across the board, same decrease of the default mentality of the front three, and the left back was, instead of a wing back support, a full back support. His mentality is still a little above the default value set by the tactic creator to let him have more willingness to get higher up the pitch during the attacks. This formation was mostly, the both of them, solid in the defense, and the problem was more in the attack, sending numbers ahead. Working from that, I created this 4-3-3 during the Liga Adelante season, and this was used only once in the pre-season of this season in the Liga BBVA. Again, left back had his mentality increased to join the attack, since usually I used there Roberto Canella, who is more of an offensive left back than a defensive one. Closing down was increased, but I'm not sure why. Probably a byproduct of the 4-5-1 that was decreased in regards to the default of that formation, and I didn't touch it in it. Again, the creative freedom of the side midfielders, the both playmakers, was diminished to avoid them to get too far to the opposite side of the field, leaving too wide a hole in the flanks. And the closing down was just left more or less there, and this was possibly also a change from the other formation that I forgot to undo, as I would prefer a higher closing down like the right side of the pitch, so they would be more willing to mark players in wide areas. The central midfielder had his mentality decreased in a great measure, and his closing down as well, because one of the problems that this formation had at the first was the big gap between the midfield and the back four, which created a lot of space that was being exploited by the opposition and was leading to many chances of goal. His individual instruction of holding up the ball was set to no for a faster game. Just like before with the wingers, the side strikers of the formation had their mentalities slightly lowered in order for them not to run too far ahead and stay where the balls could be more or less easily sent to them. The creative freedom of the poacher was taken a little higher because I wanted him to show a little more mobility than the default, though not so much. As to get to hug the touchline, I want from them a little of wide play, to be not so distant or so far apart from the behavior of the wingers in the 4-5-1. And the central striker had his runs from deep set to rarely and lower mentality, and creative freedom lowered to keep him in the middle and dropping closer to the midfield. So it was sort of mimicking a 4-3-1-2, which is basically the shape that the 4-5-1 assumed during the attack. At first, when the defensive midfielder of that 4-5-1 formation was not set to run from deep or run with the ball. It looked like a 4-4-2 diamond, narrow, but with the strikers set very wide, while in defense it was a 4-5-1. This kept being a 4-3-3 both in defense and attack. It was not an unnatural decision that 4-3-3 formation could eventually develop in a 4-4-2 diamond narrow that was used in the last 2 months of competition, and therefore it has not had as much time to develop as other tactics. Philosophy is balanced in this case because I didn't want the fullbacks to get too audacious running forward. And for the same reasons I didn't have them having the ball too often, that losing the ball in attempts of dribbling will create many chances against us, so the focus passing through the middle. Many changes in mentality and the like are alike the previous tactics discussed. The deadline playmaker had his runs from deep to sometimes, in account of the opposition starting to pile up men forward, so I wanted him to be more readily running forward to offer support in the high parts of the pitch. Didn't change the creative freedom of the offensive playmaker, because with Fowling there, he didn't seem as prone to run into the left half of the pitch as the players I used to place there in the previous season: Cases, Mandy, Sergio Alvarez. I took down his closing down because I didn't want him to run too far ahead trying to press on the opposition, and don't not close down the white players until being closer to our defense. It was a set that was excessive in the low setting, as it was probably the culprit of one goal from a cross made by a fullback that was being completely alone around this area. The chances to mentalities and creative freedom of the strikers, as well as run from position changes of the top two, are meant with the same intentions than in the previous tactics discussed, to keep them around the middle and not drift too wide, and to not run too high forward where they'd be isolated and hard to find in passes. The poacher was being played mostly by Sangoy or Simone Zaza, who are intelligent players with good passing, so I left them most of his instructions to sometimes to leave doing that or not to their judgment. In this case, the attacking midfielder was set to attacking more than the default, because I wanted him to be on a higher mentality, to overlap and get ahead of the poacher and be another option for through passes apart from the other striker. And finally, we get to the 4-2-3-1 that has been the most often used tactic of this season. The play offside is because at the start I had slow center backs and I didn't trust them to get too far ahead, and during the second half of the season, because 3 of the 4 back players were playing together for the first time, as the 2 center backs were new, and the right back, who was Manolev, had played little, so I didn't want problems with communication causing them to break the offside traps. The left side players, winger and left back, were left with the instructions on the default settings. The right winger had his mentality lowered as usual to keep him from running too far ahead and receive balls more easily than if he was further ahead. Leaving the striker as poacher with the default mentality as high as it is was a consequence of something that I will mention now, speaking about the attacking midfielder. And that is initially with the default mentality, that is kings is 15th, and I originally lowered it to 12. The 14 value is from the last matches used, and I will speak about that a bit in a moment. With the default mentality, he used to run forward too much, too far ahead, and he was in line with the striker. So he turned the 4-2-3-1 in a 4-2-4, which was not being good and prevented us from getting a good build-up of the play, as he was getting himself out from being a passing option for the midfielders. So lowering his mentality approached him to them and made him available for passes. In the latter games, however, with the opposition being more respectful of us and dropping deeper, his lower mentality seemed to get him among the midfielders defending of the other team and was denying him the space. So I tried to increase his mentality so he'd be a little forward, and that would be tied with lowering the mentality of the ball winning midfielder down to 14. Sorry, to 14. Yes, to 14. In order to make the ball winning midfielder drop deeper, be an easier passing option for the deep line playmaker as an intermediate to get the ball to the advanced playmaker, and increasing the distance between those two, try to drag the midfielders that were around the attacking playmaker towards him and free space for the advancing playmaker. The increasing sometimes the advancing playmaker mentality was just an attempt to even increase even more that distance between the two and the space between the two to be exploited by both when in the attack. And linked to that could be also trying to pass the center backs of the opposition further ahead by increasing even more the mentality of the striker, but that's something I haven't got to try, as the season has ended before I put that into work. Previously to setting his mentality at 14, because of that his mentality was set as default, as to get more attention and better of the advanced playmaker and help in the attack phase, as the playmaker was to remain more in the defense. Other possibilities would be in exchange the defensive and support roles between these two. Another thing that has not been attempted, and that I think is everything that I have to say about the tactics. As in the other thing, the part that could have been interesting, that is the set pieces. As I mentioned during the first season, I did nothing with the set pieces, and it's everything set to default values. And this is the end of this series. The next will be with Kievo, trying to replicate the stock style of playing. Thank you for watching this series. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this chapter has something interesting for you. Hope you enjoy. See you next time.